Folks, let's start tonight with a video, first obtained by MSNBC. Former special counsel Jack Smith is now making his first public comments about his investigations into Donald Trump, speaking exclusively with MSNBC's Andrew Weissman in London. During that extensive conversation, Smith blasted the recent charges brought against Trump's perceived political enemies.
This latest prosecution of the former director of the FBI. There's a process to secure an indictment. There's a process of predication, having some evidence before you do that. And again, I only know what I see myself in the media, but the career prosecutors, the apolitical prosecutors who analyzed this said there wasn't a case. And so they brought somebody in who had never been a criminal prosecutor on days' notice to secure an indictment a day before the statute of limitations ended. That just reeks of lack of process.
The former special counsel also defended his team and all of the career public servants who have been pushed out of the Justice Department because of the Trump administration.
I think the attacks on public servants, particularly nonpartisan public servants, I think it has a cost for our country that is incalculable. And I think that it's hard to communicate to folks how much that is going to cost us. If you think getting rid of the people who know most about national security is going to make our country safer, you do not know anything about national security. And that's happening throughout the department. It makes me concerned. Nothing like what we see now has ever gone on.
Joining us now, MSNBC legal analyst Mary McCord. She served in the Justice Department as acting Assistant Attorney General for National Security. She now co-hosts MSNBC's Main Justice podcast. And Brendan Ballou, former federal prosecutor and attorney with the Justice Department's National Security Division.
Mary, why now?
Why is he speaking now?
Yeah.
Well, I mean, that's a good question you'll have to ask Jack, but I think he's probably, in some ways, it was precipitated by what has now happened, that crossing of the Rubicon, the bringing cases against political enemies. First James Comey, then Letitia James, and according to the president and others, there are more to come. And so, I get asked a lot of times by journalists and others, the kind of what about question, right? Like, what about the Jack Smith prosecutions of Donald Trump? And this is like apples and oranges. And the rest of that interview with Jack, he talks about some of the differences in the cases, the abundant predication they had for both the Mar-a-Lago case and the January 6th related case, and the evidence of willfulness when it came to Mar-a-Lago and the mishandling of classified information. And, you just can't compare that to what we're seeing now, which is going after a person, not following the trail of a crime, and going after a person and trying to find some crimes. This idea of looking, with respect to Letitia James, through, mortgage documents and things to see if there's any little gotcha that they can find where there's really no significant federal interest at all. It's not like a national security investigation like what Jack Smith was doing, particularly with the Mar-a-Lago case. I mean, this is like going after a person and finding a crime, and or an alleged crime, I should say. And I think he feels strongly, and he should feel strongly.
I mean, he felt very strongly. Let's hear more from Jack Smith. I think the Supreme Court's presidential immunity ruling fuels a lot of how Donald Trump comports himself. Jack Smith weighed in on that today. Take a listen.
I think if you do that, it's tantamount to saying you can never prosecute powerful high officials, because they'll always there could always be a concern that they'll stay in power and then come after people. The problem is not prosecuting high officials who did something wrong when you do it according to the processes of law in your country. It's the retaliation. That's the problem. And that's the thing that we should be preventing.
Brendan, I was really struck by this entire interview, frankly. I think Jack Smith, he wasn't defending like the bureaucracy, if you will, throughout this conversation. What he was really talking about was foundational to our democracy. And this assertion that the rule of law should define whatever order is and how the people within the Department of Justice comport themselves, not whatever the president or anybody else would like to think should be. Your take.
Yeah, no, absolutely. One thing that came through in Smith's conversation was he kept going back to this idea of process. And it was processed not for process's sake, but it's because the rules and regulations that we have in the Department of Justice make sure that decisions aren't made for political reasons, but are made because of the facts and the law. One of the things, I frankly kind of found it a little moving to hear Jack Smith talk. Most of us kind of only know him through, still images in newspaper articles or, prepared remarks. Seeing him speak extemporaneously about the Department of Justice's processes and about its values just stood in just enormous contrast to what this administration does and the people who lead it. I found myself very moved and very saddened by our current moment.
You wanted to talk about presidential immunity?
Yes. So one of the things that I find so ironic is that the majority in the immunity case made this point of saying we need to provide immunity from criminal prosecutions for presidents so that the presidency doesn't cannibalize itself, and that was the word used, with every incoming president then prosecuting its predecessors. But that is exactly what we're seeing.
Because the other person speaking out and mustering courage is Tish James, along with Jack Smith in this news cycle. I have never seen Tish James really sound the note she sounded last night. But the idea that Donald Trump is going to roll over these people, or that these folks once targeted with what is clearly a vindictive prosecution, just going on the sights and sounds of his own appointees inside the Justice Department and these U.S. Attorney's office, is unprecedented in its own right.
So we're starting to see more of a pushback. Which is somewhat to be expected. We've gone from the talking about it stage of these prosecutions that appear to be motivated by retribution and have been forced through over the objections of career prosecutors into this stage of active prosecutions. We are likely to see John Bolton, the former national security advisor, charged next. We don't know about Adam Schiff in Maryland on another mortgage fraud case. But this is a necessity now. You've pushed people to the back wall. You've hit marble, right? In order to defend themselves, their reputations, and perhaps even their liberty, these people have got to start talking out. So what's interesting about Smith, Letitia James, I've observed as a politician for probably 25 years. We're both from Brooklyn. This was fairly characteristic of the way that she's spoken about Donald Trump in the past. Obviously, there's a great urgency that wasn't there before. But the Smith conversation, for those of us who covered him and essentially had to sort of feed upon old transcripts and see him speaking before the criminal court in The Hague, I think we maybe got 100 words out of him at 2 press conferences.
Yeah.
It was just fascinating to see how not only confident he was, but how much he appeared ready for battle. And I'll tell you something, over the last few months, I've been talking to Republicans on the Hill who were expressing a lot of concern about having Smith appear in public. That is why I think the House, Jim Jordan's Oversight Committee today requested from Jack Smith that he do a transcribed interview behind closed doors. They don't necessarily, and I'm not asserting this as my opinion, this is what Republicans have told me, they do not want that Jack Smith to provide video clips of the type that he just provided to Andrew Weissman.
Well, on that note, let's play another one.
These are people who are not self-promoters. They do not like to tell their own story. They cannot start a sentence with I. They start that with we. These are team players who don't want anything but to do good in the world. They're not interested in politics. And I get very concerned when I see how easy it is to demonize these people for political ends, when these are the very sort of people I think we should be celebrating. The people on my special counsel team were like that. The idea that politics played a role in who worked on that case or who got chosen is ludicrous. And Andrew, and this is another thing that I think if you're not inside the U.S. Department of Justice, the idea that politics would play a role in big cases like this, it's absolutely ludicrous, and it's totally contrary to my experience as a prosecutor.
The most salient thing that he points at is the truest thing. That I think anyone that has either worked in the government, I worked in the government, and after 9/11, trying to get Bob Mueller to do press to talk about the things they were doing to keep the country safe was near impossible. It was easier to get things declassified from the CIA than to get Bob Mueller to do a press roundtable. And then the notion that any of these people is comfortable defending their place in a democracy. They're head down people. I mean, what is the Pandora's box that has been opened by this, retribution campaign on steroids that the Republicans in the House and Senate have greenlit every step of the way?
Look, to embrace the cliche, we are in terra incognita, uncharted territory here. We don't know how the heck this is all going to play out. I mean, the one thing that the dynamic that is shifting is we have witnessed the sound of one hand punching for 7 months. Most of the individuals that are involved and have been targeted, and I wrote about Chris Meyer and Walt Giardina. They were kind enough to talk with me about their experiences in being fired. They were very, very reluctant. It took me quite a long time to get them to even agree to an interview. These are FBI agents. They tend to be extraordinarily reluctant to speak in public and more wary of the press than they are of government officials. But I think what's going on right now is the damage to these institutions is so profound. And the direct influence being exercised by the White House so significant that I think you are going to see people speaking out more and more. Now, how this all plays out in public, how the American people respond to that, I think is very much an open question, because this is an administration that has proven really adept at providing one side of the story to its constituency. So I don't know what the impact is going to be.
So Trump is being exposed. Jack Smith is coming out and exposing Trump. And I know this is probably not what Jack wanted to do, because he was like, he had a specific time and place to talk about Trump, and that was in the context of a court. Remember, Jack spoke very little on camera. He did put out statements, he put out documents, he put out court releases that were public in the sense because court documents are public, right? But those were like to the court. The only reason we saw them is just a function of how American court reporting works. He gave almost no interviews. I remember how big of a deal it was when we first saw him actually formally list the indictment, and he spoke briefly on camera, and that was it. Because he knew his job is like, I'm going to speak in the courtroom, and like that's my place to go at it. But I think that, obviously his work wound down when Trump won again. And the DOJ policies that you don't prosecute a president. I think that's dumb. I think even the president is not above the law, even in office. But the Supreme Court and American precedent disagrees with me, unfortunately. But Jack is speaking up now because Trump is just that dangerous. He is just that dangerous. People need to break, age-old protocols, age-old niceties, the gentleman's game of politics that used to exist where former politicians, former top prosecutors, former generals, they didn't speak about the politics of the day, or at least it was seen as kind of like gauche to do that, right? Because now all bets are off. If Trump wants to spit on the norms, because like some of the things Trump's doing are illegal, but some of them are just, they're legal because no president has been such an a-hole like him to actually break these 200-year-old norms. So when he's going to break the norms, you have to fight fire with fire. That's why California is counter gerrymandering. And that's why you have people like Jack Smith speaking out in public, on camera, for the world to hear, this man is dangerous and we all need to abandon Trump and abandon Trumpism and MAGA.